Sergeant Nathan Carter had seen planets die before. He had watched cities crumble under orbital bombardments, witnessed alien civilizations turn to dust by the unrelenting march of war. But nothing quite prepared him for the horror of Epsilon 3. The sky was a churning mass of fire and smoke, streaked with the contrails of descending drop pods and the flashing arcs of plasma fire. The ground was a wasteland of collapsed towers and skeletal remains of structures that had once been homes. Somewhere in the distance, the guttural cries of the enemy forces, Forlac raiders, echoed through the ruins. Nathan pressed his back against a fractured wall, gripping his pulse rifle tightly. His squad had been decimated in the ambush. Now, he was alone behind enemy lines, his comms jammed, his rations running low. He exhaled, pushing down the creeping dread. One step at a time. That's how survival worked. A sound made him freeze. Soft, barely audible, a whimper. He turned, pulse hammering, and scanned the rubble-strewn alleyway. At first, he saw nothing but wreckage. Then, amid the shattered remains of a building, he caught a glimpse of movement, a pair of large, luminescent eyes peeking out from beneath a collapsed beam. Nathan's breath caught. A child. An alien child. She was small, no more than 8 or 9 years old by human standards. Her pale lavender skin was smeared with dust and blood, her silver-white hair tangled. She clutched something, a small pendant, glowing faintly in the dim light. Nathan lowered his rifle. "Hey," he said softly. The girl flinched, her body tensing like a trapped animal. He held up his hands. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." She didn't move. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. Nathan hesitated. He had been trained to see aliens as either allies or threats. Nothing in his military training had prepared him for this. A frightened child, alone in the middle of a war zone. A distant explosion rocked the ground. The Forlac raiders were getting closer. If he left her here, she would die. He made his decision. Moving carefully, he knelt beside the collapsed beam and reached out. "Come on, kid. We gotta get out of here." She hesitated. Then, after a long moment, she grasped his hand. Her name was Miri. At least, that was what she managed to whisper as they slipped through the ruins, avoiding patrols of Forlac raiders. Nathan carried her when she grew too tired to walk. She was light, too light, as if she hadn't eaten in days. She barely spoke, but when she did, her voice was soft, melodic, the words unfamiliar. Yet somehow, Nathan understood her. Not in a way he could explain. It was like the meaning just formed in his mind. Something about her was different. By the second day of their trek, he had started to notice small, inexplicable things. When they needed to hide from a patrol, shadows seemed to lengthen around them, making them harder to see. When Nathan's water supply ran low, she touched the condensation on a metal surface, and the droplets coalesced, forming into a small but drinkable amount. She was doing it. She had some kind of ability, something beyond human comprehension. On the third night, the Forlac found them. Nathan woke to the sound of boots crunching through debris. He grabbed his rifle and pulled Miri close. "Stay quiet," he whispered. But it was too late. A guttural roar split the air as a Forlac soldier spotted them. The alien was massive, clad in black armor, its reptilian face twisted in a snarl. Nathan fired first. The pulse round struck the Forlac in the chest, staggering it but not bringing it down. The creature bellowed, raising its plasma rifle. Miri gasped, and suddenly, the air shifted. The shadows around them deepened, swirling unnaturally. The Forlac froze, confusion flashing across its predatory eyes. Nathan didn't hesitate. He fired again, this time hitting the exposed joint in its armor. The creature collapsed with a gurgling snarl. He turned to Miri, his heart pounding. What the hell was that? She looked at him with wide, glowing eyes. Then, almost apologetically, she whispered, "I made you unseen." Nathan shivered. By the time they neared the mountains, Nathan knew they had been followed. The Forlac wouldn't give up so easily. Miri pointed to a hidden pathway winding through the cliffs. "Safe," she said. He didn't question it. The trek was brutal, but they pressed on. By the time they reached the valley beyond, dawn was breaking over the alien landscape. And there, nestled among the hills, was something Nathan hadn't expected: a village. Dozens of Miri's people emerged from their homes, their eyes wide as they saw her. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Nathan set Miri down, watching as an older woman, her skin marked with glowing patterns, rushed forward, falling to her knees and embracing the child. Miri turned back to him. "You stay?" Nathan hesitated. He was a soldier. He had a duty. But as he looked around, at the wary but grateful eyes of the villagers, at Miri's hopeful face, he realized something. For the first time in years, he wasn't just fighting to survive. He had saved someone. And maybe, just maybe, that meant more than the war he had left behind. Nathan stood at the edge of the village, rifle still slung over his shoulder, watching the sun rise over the alien landscape. He hadn't slept. His body ached from exhaustion, but his mind remained alert. Miri sat beside him, her small fingers tracing symbols into the dirt. She had barely left his side since they arrived. Her people, tall, graceful beings with iridescent skin and luminous eyes, kept their distance. He felt their stares, their cautious whispers. Nathan couldn't blame them. To them, he was an outsider, a soldier from a race that had brought war to their world, even if he had been fighting on the right side. The Forlac had been the invaders, but the human military had fought their battles on alien soil, leaving destruction in their wake. But Miri had changed something. She had clung to him, even after being reunited with her people. She had spoken to them in her strange, musical tongue, explaining what had happened. And now, instead of treating him as an enemy, they watched him with wary curiosity. Footsteps approached. Nathan turned, hand instinctively going to his rifle. It was the woman from before, the elder who had embraced Miri upon their arrival. Her skin shimmered under the rising sun, the glowing tattoos along her arms pulsing faintly. She was taller than him, her features sharp yet elegant. "I am Ilya's son," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Miri's kin. You brought her back to us." Nathan nodded. "She would have died out there." Ilya's luminous eyes studied him. "You protected her, risked your life for her. Why?" Nathan exhaled, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Because she's just a kid. Because I couldn't leave her behind." For a long moment, Ilya soon said nothing. Then, she extended a hand. "The village owes you a debt, Sergeant Carter." He hesitated. Then, slowly, he shook her hand. The tension in the village shifted. The people relaxed, if only slightly. But Nathan knew peace never lasted long in a war zone. The attack came at night. Nathan woke to the sound of screams. He was on his feet in an instant, pulse rifle raised, scanning the darkness. Fires burned along the outskirts of the village. Figures moved through the night, hulking, armored Forlac raiders. They had followed him here. Nathan cursed. "This is my fault." Blaster fire ripped through the village. The air smelled of burning wood and scorched flesh. Nathan sprinted toward the sound of fighting, his instincts taking over. He spotted Ilyasun standing at the center of the chaos, arms raised. The glowing tattoos along her skin brightened, and suddenly, the air shimmered. A wave of unseen energy rippled outward. The Forlac stumbled, their weapons flickering as if disrupted by some unseen force. But they recovered quickly. Nathan fired, his pulse rounds slamming into the nearest enemy. The Forlac bellowed and collapsed. Another charged at him, claws extended. Nathan dodged, slamming the butt of his rifle into its head before finishing it off with a close-range shot. More of them were coming. Then, Miri screamed. Nathan turned just in time to see a Forlac warlord, towering, clad in reinforced armor, grab her. She struggled, her silver eyes wide with terror. The warlord bared his fangs. Nathan didn't think. He moved. He sprinted forward, firing. The warlord raised an energy shield, deflecting the shots. Nathan didn't stop. He threw himself at the Forlac, slamming into its side. They crashed into the dirt. The warlord roared, claws raking across Nathan's arm, slicing through his armor. Pain flared, but Nathan ignored it. He reached for his combat knife and drove it into the warlord's throat. The creature spasmed, choking on its own blood. Nathan yanked the blade free, and turned to Miri. "Are you okay?" She nodded, trembling. Then something strange happened. Miri closed her eyes. Her small hands clenched into fists, and the shadows moved. They stretched unnaturally, swirling around the remaining Forlac. The air grew cold. A strange hum vibrated through the ground. The Forlac hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. The villagers attacked as one. Spears of solid light erupted from their hands, impaling the raiders. The Forlac, despite their size and strength, began to fall. Within minutes, it was over. The Forlac were dead. The village stood victorious. And Miri was staring at her hands in shock. I didn't mean to," she whispered. Nathan knelt beside her. "What did you do?" She looked up at him, fear in her glowing eyes. "I don't know." The next morning, the village was silent. Bodies were burned. The wounded were treated. But everyone knew that this wasn't the end. The Forlac had found them, and more would come. Ilya soon pulled Nathan aside. "Miri is not ordinary," she said carefully. Nathan crossed his arms. "Yeah, I figured." Ilya soon exhaled. "She has a gift, a rare power among our kind. We call it the sight beyond. She can see and bend reality in ways even we do not fully understand." Nathan frowned. "Then why was she alone when I found her?" Ilya hesitated. "Because we feared her." The words hit him like a punch. "She was born with abilities beyond our control," Ilya continued. "Some believed she was a danger. Others, that she was a curse." Nathan's fists clenched. "She's just a kid." "She is," Ilya agreed. "But now, the Forlac will come for her. They felt what she did last night. They will not stop until they have her." Nathan's stomach twisted. "So what are we going to do about it?" Ilya soon met his gaze. "We will fight." That night, the elders gathered. Nathan stood before them, feeling the weight of their stares. "You are a warrior," Ilya soon said. "You know battle better than any of us?" Nathan nodded. "That's what I was trained for." Ilya exhaled. "Then stay. Stay and help us fight. Help us protect Miri." Nathan hesitated. His orders had been to regroup with his unit. He was supposed to leave this planet behind, but Miri was watching him, her small hands clutching the pendant she always carried. He thought about the war, about the countless lives lost, about how, for the first time, he had saved someone instead of destroying. He made his decision. Nathan looked Ilya soon in the eye. "I'll stay." Nathan had spent his life following orders. Missions came and went, battlefields changed, but war had always been the constant. Now, he found himself preparing for one he had never expected, defending an alien village from an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. The Forlac would return, and next time, they wouldn't just send a raiding party. Nathan stood at the edge of the village, scanning the horizon. Miri sat on a rock nearby, idly tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. She had been quiet since the night of the attack. "You okay, kid?" Nathan asked. Miri looked up at him. "I hurt them." Nathan exhaled. "You did what you had to." She shook her head. "I didn't mean to. It just happened." Nathan crouched beside her. "I've seen a lot of people with power. Some use it to destroy, some use it to protect. You protected your people, Miri. That's what matters." She hesitated, then whispered, "But what if I am dangerous?" Nathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we figure it out. Together." She looked up at him, her silver eyes searching his face for something. Reassurance, maybe. Finally, she nodded. The village wasn't ready for war, but it had to be. Nathan spent the next week training them. He taught them how to fortify their defenses, set up ambush points, and use their natural abilities in combat. The villagers were quick learners. Their energy-based weapons were unlike anything he had seen before, crafted from crystallized light, shaped by thought and will. Spears that extended into blades, shields woven from pure energy, arrows that guided themselves to their targets. But the Forlac were stronger, more brutal. Nathan knew that sheer force wouldn't win this war. They needed strategy. He mapped out the terrain, marking every defensible position. He showed the villagers how to set traps, how to create kill zones. If the Forlac came in force, they would pay for every inch of ground. Miri trained alongside them. She was hesitant at first, afraid of her own power. But slowly, under Nathan's guidance, she learned to control it. She could bend shadows, turn them into barriers, even distort the air around her to make herself almost invisible. She wasn't a soldier. Not yet. But she was becoming something far more dangerous. The warning came 2 days later. A scout returned to the village, barely alive. He collapsed at the gates, his body torn and bleeding. "They are coming," he gasped. "Hundreds of them. And they have a warlord." Silence fell over the village. Nathan's stomach clenched. A Forlac warlord meant trouble. These weren't just raiders. This was an extermination. That night, Ilya soon gathered the council. Nathan stood at her side, arms crossed. "We cannot flee," one of the elders said. "There is nowhere to go." "Then we make our stand," Nathan said. Ilya soon nodded. "Agreed." The room fell into hushed whispers. Nathan looked at Miri. She was staring into the fire, her small hands clenched into fists. Finally, she spoke. "I know who they are sending," she whispered. Everyone turned to her. Miri's voice was barely audible. "His name is Zorvek the Unbroken." Nathan frowned. "How do you know that?" Miri hesitated. Then, slowly, she touched her pendant. The soft glow within it flickered. "He spoke to me." A chill ran through the room. Nathan knelt beside her. "What do you mean, kid?" Miri's eyes shimmered. "I saw him, in my dreams. He knows about me. He knows what I did." She swallowed. "And he's coming for me." Nathan clenched his jaw. Zorvek. He had heard the name before, one of the most feared Forlac commanders. A monster in the shape of a warrior. If Miri was right, this wasn't just an attack. It was a hunt. They came at dawn. Hundreds of Forlac warriors, their armor glinting in the rising sun, their war cries echoing across the valley. They marched in formation, their weapons humming with energy. And at the center of it all, standing atop a ridge, was Zorvek the Unbroken. Nathan raised his rifle, his grip tightening. "Showtime," he muttered. The first wave of Forlac charged. The ground trembled beneath their heavy footfalls. The villagers stood their ground, their energy weapons igniting in the dim light. Then the battle began. Nathan fired, dropping the first Forlac before it reached the defenses. The villagers followed suit, unleashing a volley of glowing projectiles. The Forlac stumbled, but they did not stop. Then the traps activated. The ground beneath the charging warriors collapsed, sending dozens of them plummeting into hidden pits lined with energy spikes. Others were caught in shimmering barriers, their movements slowed as villagers moved in for the kill. But the Forlac kept coming. Nathan fought like a man possessed, his rifle overheating as he took down enemy after enemy. Blood, both alien and his own, splattered his armor. He turned just in time to see Zorvek leap into the battle. The Forlac warlord was massive, nearly twice Nathan's size. His armor was reinforced with jagged metal, his weapons crackling with unstable energy. His eyes locked onto Nathan. Nathan barely had time to react before Zorvek was on him. The impact sent Nathan flying. He crashed into the dirt, his rifle torn from his hands. Zorvek loomed over him, raising a massive blade. Nathan rolled, barely avoiding the strike. He grabbed his combat knife, slashing at the warlord's exposed leg. The blade barely pierced the armor. Zorvek snarled and kicked Nathan across the battlefield. Pain exploded through Nathan's ribs. He gasped, struggling to rise. He was outmatched. But then, the shadows moved. Miri stood behind Zorvek, her silver eyes glowing like twin moons. The air around her rippled. The ground cracked beneath her feet. Zorvek turned, snarling. Miri raised a hand, and the shadows swallowed him whole. The battlefield fell silent. The Forlac warriors hesitated, their warlord gone, consumed by the darkness. Nathan stared at Miri, breathing hard. "What did you do?" Miri swayed, her body trembling. "I sent him away." Nathan's blood ran cold. "Where?" Miri's lips parted, but no words came. The Forlac warriors, leaderless, began to retreat. The battle was over. But Nathan knew this war was far from finished. The village had survived. For now. But Miri's power had grown. And whatever she had done to Zorvek, it wasn't natural. Nathan found her sitting alone that night, staring at her pendant. "You okay, kid?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I don't know where I sent him." Nathan sat beside her. "We'll figure it out," he said. Miri finally looked at him. "What if I can't control it?" Nathan exhaled. "Then I'll be here to help you." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Nathan gazed at the stars. The war wasn't over. The Forlac would come again. But now, he had a new mission. Protect Miri. Train her. Prepare for the storm that was still to come. 3 days had passed since the battle. The village was quiet, too quiet. The survivors buried their dead, repairing what they could, but an unease hung in the air. The Forlac had been defeated, their warlord cast into the void by Miri's power. But no one truly believed they were safe. Nathan stood near the edge of the village, rifle in hand, watching the horizon. His ribs still ached from his fight with Zorvek, but he ignored the pain. He wasn't looking for another attack. He was looking for signs of what Miri had done. The place where Zorvek had vanished was still wrong. The air shimmered there, twisting unnaturally, as if space itself had been wounded. Occasionally, the light bent in strange ways and whispers. Not words, just echoes of something else, brushed against his ears. Nathan didn't know much about physics, but he had spent enough time on alien battlefields to recognize something bad when he saw it. Miri hadn't just sent Zorvek away. She had torn something open. Miri stopped sleeping. At first, Nathan thought she was just shaken from the battle. But then he noticed the bruises under her eyes, the way she flinched at nothing, the way she stared into the dark corners of the village as if expecting something to emerge. One night, he found her sitting near the center of the village, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide and unblinking. He sat down next to her. "Talk to me, kid." Miri didn't respond right away. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she said, "He's still here." Nathan tensed. "Zorvek?" She nodded. Nathan's grip tightened on his rifle. "You saw him?" Miri shook her head. "Not saw. Felt." She finally looked at Nathan, and he shivered. Her silver eyes, once filled with childlike wonder, were darker, like twin voids. "He's not dead. He's somewhere. And he's trying to come back." Nathan exhaled. "Miri, what exactly did you do to him?" Miri's fingers clenched around her pendant. "I don't know." Nathan glanced toward the place where Zorvek had vanished. The air there still shimmered, rippling like disturbed water. Whatever Miri had done, it hadn't been clean. By the next morning, Nathan knew they had a bigger problem. The rift, the place where Zorvek had disappeared, was growing. What had once been a barely noticeable distortion in the air had become something worse. The ground around it had begun to blacken, and an eerie, pulsing hum filled the air near it. Shadows twisted and writhed, even when there was no source of light. It was unnatural, wrong. Nathan stood with Ilyasun and the other elders, staring at it. "This is not of our world," Ilya said, her voice tight. "This is something deeper, older." Nathan frowned. "Can you close it?" Ilya exchanged a glance with the other elders. "We do not know how." Miri stood behind them, hugging herself. "I didn't mean to open it," she whispered. Nathan turned to her. "I know, kid, but we need to figure out how to shut it before." A deep, resonating growl cut through the air. Nathan spun around, rifle raised. The rift pulsed, and something moved inside it. The first thing Nathan saw was the eyes, burning red, glowing like molten metal. Then the shape of a figure, massive, its silhouette distorted as it stepped through the twisting void. The Forlac warriors had been terrifying, but this was something else. The thing that emerged was not fully Zorvek, not anymore. His body had changed, his armor fused with something dark, something unnatural. His claws were longer, his fangs sharper. And the thing behind his eyes wasn't just him. He had been somewhere else, and something had come back with him. "You?" Zorvek's voice was deeper now, distorted. His gaze locked onto Miri. "You sent me into the dark, and now the dark comes for you." Nathan pushed Miri behind him, leveling his rifle. "You should have stayed gone." Zorvek laughed. Then the sky split open. What came next was pure chaos. The rift didn't just stay open. It expanded. And as it did, more things stepped through. Not Forlac. Not anything Nathan had ever seen before. Dark figures, shifting in and out of focus, as if they weren't entirely real. Their bodies were wrong, stretched and twisted, their limbs bending in unnatural ways. Their eyes burned like dying stars. The villagers screamed. Ilya soon raised her hands, sending a blast of energy at the nearest creature. The light struck it and passed straight through, as if it wasn't fully in this world. Nathan fired his rifle. The bullets hit, but the creature only shuddered, then kept moving. Nathan cursed. These things weren't just enemies. They were something else entirely, and they were hungry. Nathan grabbed Miri's hand. We need to run now. She didn't move. Her eyes were locked onto Zorvek. The warlord took a slow step forward, his new form shifting unnaturally. You cannot run from the dark, little one, Zorvek said. You brought it here, and now it will take you. Nathan pulled the trigger. The pulse shot slammed into Zorvek's chest. Zorvek barely flinched. He vanished, his body flickering out of existence, then reappeared behind Nathan in an instant. Nathan barely managed to dodge as claws raked through the air where his head had been. They couldn't fight this. Not like before. Miri, Nathan shouted. If you can do anything, do it now. Miri's breathing quickened. I don't know how. Nathan grabbed her shoulders. You do. You always have. Trust it. Trust yourself. Miri's eyes widened. Then she closed them. The air shifted. The rift stopped growing. The creatures froze. And for a single, terrible moment, everything was silent. Then Miri opened her eyes. And the void screamed. Nathan had heard many sounds in war. Gunfire, explosions, the dying cries of comrades. But this sound, the one that erupted from the rift, was something entirely different. It wasn't just noise. It was a force. The shadows twisted violently. The air became thick, suffocating, vibrating with something old and hungry. The creatures that had emerged from the rift howled in return, their bodies flickering, caught between realities. Zorvek snarled as the dark pulsed around him. What have you done? Miri stood at the center of it all, small and trembling but undeniably in control. Her silver eyes were no longer just glowing. They burned, radiant and endless. I'm sending them back, she whispered. Then she raised her hand. The darkness obeyed. The air rippled outward from Miri, like an invisible shockwave. The first creature screamed as it was suddenly yanked backward toward the rift. The others followed. The void pulled them in, one by one, their distorted forms stretching, unraveling, as if they had never fully belonged to this reality. Even Zorvek staggered. The warlord fought it, claws digging into the earth. He roared, his mutated body struggling against the force that had once welcomed him. Nathan stepped forward, gun still raised. You lost. Zorvek's eyes burned with hatred. This is not the end. The dark is awake now. It will never sleep again. Nathan felt the chill in those words. Then, with one final scream, Zorvek vanished into the void. The rift collapsed. The world shuddered. Then, silence. The battle was over. Nathan stood there, breathing hard, staring at the place where the rift had been. The ground was still scarred, blackened from the unnatural energy that had passed through it. But the air was normal again. Miri swayed on her feet. Nathan rushed to catch her before she collapsed. Hey, kid, stay with me, he murmured. Her silver eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Did I fix it? Nathan exhaled. Yeah, kid, you did. But deep down, he wasn't sure if that was true. The villagers gathered the next day, whispering. Some still feared Miri. They had seen her power. They had seen her command the dark. She is dangerous, one of the elders said. She saved us, Ilyason countered. Nathan clenched his fists. If she hadn't been here, you'd all be dead. Or worse. Silence. Then, finally, Ilya soon stepped forward. Miri is one of us. And she stays. Nathan exhaled in relief. But then Ilya turned to him. And so must you. Nathan frowned. What? You have seen too much, she said simply. The Forlac will come again. Others will come. You are a warrior. And now, you are our warrior. Nathan looked at Miri, who was watching him with quiet hope. He sighed. Guess I'm not going anywhere then. That night, as Nathan sat near the village's edge, Miri came to him. I don't think it's over, she whispered. Nathan looked at her. The rift is gone. Miri hesitated. Yes, but something else is watching. Waiting. Nathan frowned. The Forlac? Miri shook her head. No, she said. Something worse. Nathan felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. In the distance, the stars flickered, and for the first time, he wondered if something had looked back through the rift. Nathan didn't sleep that night. He sat at the edge of the village, rifle across his lap, staring at the stars. The sky looked different now. Not visibly, no one else seemed to notice. But he did. There was something lurking in the endless black, something aware. Miri's words wouldn't leave his mind. Something worse. The Forlac had been monsters, yes, but they were tangible. They bled. They could be killed. What Miri had touched, the darkness that had taken Zorvek, was not like them. It had no form, no borders. And yet, it was awake now. Nathan exhaled. If it came, they'd fight. They had to. At dawn, the real war began. The Forlac fleet arrived. Massive warships loomed over the horizon, their hulls blackened from battles on 1,000 worlds. Their numbers dwarfed anything the village had seen before. This was not a raid. This was annihilation. Nathan stood at the village center as the first dropships descended, his heart pounding. Ilyasun was beside him. We cannot win this, she said simply. Nathan's grip tightened on his rifle. Then we make them bleed for every inch of ground. Miri stood a few feet away, silent. And that scared Nathan more than anything. The Forlac did not attack immediately. Instead, a single figure approached the village gates. He was massive, almost as large as Zorvek had been, but his armor bore no corruption. He was pure Forlac, untainted by whatever Zorvek had become. Nathan stepped forward, pulse rifle raised. The warlord removed his helmet. His deep red eyes locked onto Miri. Give us the child. Silence. Ilyasun stepped forward. She is one of us. The Forlac did not blink. Then you will all die with her. Nathan's muscles tensed. He didn't doubt the Forlac's words. Miri finally spoke. No. Nathan turned to her. Miri, don't. She stepped past him, past Ilya, past the gates, and stood before the warlord. You don't understand what you're asking, she said softly. The Forlac watched her with something almost like fear. We do, he said. We know what you are becoming, and we will not allow it. Nathan was moving before he even realized it. Over my dead body. The warlord didn't move. If you stand in our way, human, you will die screaming. Miri turned to Nathan, eyes filled with something far older than a child should have. She wasn't scared. She was resigned. Nathan, she whispered. It's okay. Nathan froze. No, it's not. Miri smiled. A sad, tired smile. I think this was always going to happen. The Forlac warlord stood, silent, waiting. Nathan's heart pounded. Kid, you don't have to do this. Miri exhaled. I don't think I have a choice. And then, before he could stop her, she turned to the warlord and vanished. Nathan screamed. He ran forward, gun raised. But the Forlac were already gone. No ships, no war, just silence. Miri had gone willingly. Nathan stood there for what felt like eternity, staring at the place where she had been. Ilyasun placed a hand on his shoulder. She saved us. Nathan's throat was dry. I was supposed to save her. Ilyasun didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. Some wars don't end with victory. Some wars just end. Nathan left the village a week later. He couldn't stay. Not without her. He took a ship from the wreckage of the Forlac battlefields and set out into the stars, chasing rumors, searching for answers. Searching for her. Because he knew, deep down, that the Forlac hadn't just taken Miri to kill her. They had taken her because they were afraid. Afraid of what she might become. Afraid of the darkness that still lingered in the void. And Nathan? Nathan wasn't afraid. He was going to bring her back, no matter what it took.